How about a big round of applause for Ira? Come on up, Ira.
It's 11 o'clock at night, and I'm about to go to sleep. Suddenly the phone rings. I pick up the phone, and it's the family of Mrs. Millman. Mrs. Millman had passed away. Now, that's not a terrible surprise. I'm a rabbi. I have many funerals throughout the time. And in fact, Mrs. Millman has been sick for a long time. She's been hanging by a hair for about 8 months. Every week or so, I'd hear from Mrs. Millman, and she'd say, "Rabbi, I don't know how much more time I have." And so every week we'd have this conversation, and I'd say, "Okay, Mrs. Millman, when the time comes, I'll be there." And sure enough, now it's 11 o'clock, and it's time to meet the family. When I meet the family, we start planning the funeral according to Jewish tradition. We try to do it as quickly as possible. So we were planning it for the next day. And they tell me that Mrs. Millman, they say my mother-in-law, she was a very religious person. And she would feel this special merit, she would appreciate, if we buried her with a lot of Jewish books. Now, if those who aren't familiar in Jewish tradition, if you have books that have become in disrepair and they can't be used, the holy books, we have a tradition of burying them in the ground. But the problem is not everybody understands that tradition or familiar with that tradition. So it's always hard to explain it, and we usually don't get a chance to do that. But now, Mrs. Millman's family says she wants to be buried with books. And I have a synagogue with closets and closets and closets filled with old holy books. And I'm like, you don't have to say this twice. Next morning, I load up my van. I got boxes and boxes and bags. We're all excited. I'm like, where's Mrs. Millman, right? We get to the cemetery, and I start backing up and with like that truck noise. Ooh, 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 ooh. And we put the casket into the ground. We say whatever we need to say, and I'm like, all right, let her rip, right? And sure enough, we take out all of the bags and all of the boxes and all of this, and we pile them in as much as we could fit. We actually ran out of room, but we decided to keep the casket inside. And then the family gets together, and we all participate, and we bury Mrs. Millman and all of the boxes in this holy ceremony. And then it was my turn to say the holy prayers. So I go to get my book. Surprise. So I go to get my book, and the book, of course, is nowhere to be found. And I said, "Where's my book?" And they said, "Where was it?" And I said, "It was right over there on that bench." And we all looked down at Mrs. Millman. And the son-in-law says, "Do you want us to try to get it, Rabbi?" And I said, "No, we're not going to try to get it." So we all gather around the grave with Mrs. Millman and the thousands and thousands of books and my book. And we take a moment of silence. Let us take a moment of silence and remember Mrs. Millman for who she was and what she represented. And forever and ever, Mrs. Millman will always have my book, and the rabbi's book, and we'll be connected for eternity. Thank you.